The sun dipped low over the horizon, casting long shadows across the streets of the city. Mara pulled her coat tighter against the evening chill as she made her way home from a cafe where she worked long hours to keep food on the table for her 2 children. The streets were bustling with people, but Mara felt invisible, just another figure in the crowd, lost in her thoughts. It had been 5 years since her husband's death, and those years had been nothing but a constant struggle to survive. Gone were the days when she spent afternoons in libraries, poring over history books with a sense of wonder. Now, the only books she read were bills, stacked high on the kitchen table, demanding attention. Her son, Luca, was 12 now, on the cusp of becoming a teenager. His passion for history was as strong as hers had once been, but with each passing day, she saw his enthusiasm dim as reality set in. They couldn't afford to fuel dreams in their household. Sarah, her youngest, was only 7 and still blissfully unaware of the weight Mara carried. To Sarah, Mara was a hero, a figure of strength who made sure there was always dinner on the table and a roof over their heads, even if the rent was always overdue. As she passed the old city fountain, Mara slowed her steps. The fountain was a relic of the city's past glory, now largely forgotten. Once, it had been a gathering place for the wealthy and the curious, a symbol of the city's thriving trade routes centuries ago. But now the fountain was cracked, its stone surface weathered by time and neglect, much like the city itself. Mara often found herself drawn to the fountain, perhaps because it reminded her of better days, days when she still believed in the power of history, in the idea that stories from the past could shape the future. Now, it seemed like the only story she was living was one of survival. She paused for a moment, looking down into the shallow pool of water that had collected at the base of the fountain. A few coins glittered beneath the surface, offerings from people who still believed in wishes. Mara gave a half-smile. Wishes were for those who had the luxury of hope. For her, it was just another day of making sure her children didn't go to bed hungry. Mara was about to continue her walk home when something caught her eye. A glint in the fading light, something that shimmered just beneath the water's surface. Curious, she bent down and reached into the cool water, her fingers brushing against something hard and metallic. She pulled it out, and her breath caught in her throat. It was a coin, but not just any coin. This one was different. Larger than the usual coins people tossed into the fountain, it was thick and heavy in her hand. The surface was tarnished with age, but Mara could still make out the faint engravings on its face, an intricate design, like something out of an old history book. She turned it over, and there, in faded letters, was an inscription in a language she didn't recognize. For a moment, she stood there, staring at the coin in disbelief. Her mind raced. She had seen coins like this before, not in real life, but in the books she used to read. Coins like this belonged to museums, in the hands of collectors, not in some forgotten fountain in the middle of a city that no longer cared about its past. Her heart pounded as a thought took root. What if this coin was valuable? Not just valuable in the historical sense, but valuable in the way that mattered, financially. She had no idea how much a coin like this could be worth, but the idea of selling it filled her with both hope and dread. This could be the answer to all her problems, a way out of the crushing debt and the constant worry that had been her companion for years. But another thought quickly followed. What if it was important? What if it had historical significance, something that should be preserved, not sold? The Mara of 5 years ago would never have considered selling such a treasure. But that Mara was gone, buried under the weight of responsibility and survival. She slipped the coin into her pocket and continued walking, her mind racing. By the time she reached the small apartment she called home, she had already made up her mind. She had to find out more about the coin, what was, where it came from, and most importantly, how much it was worth. Luca and Sarah were already home, sitting at the small kitchen table, doing their homework. Luca glanced up as she walked in, his face lighting up for a brief moment before the usual worry settled back in. He was old enough to know that things weren't easy for them, and Mara hated that he had to carry that burden with her. "Hey, Mom," Luca said, putting down his pencil. "How was work?" "Same as always," Mara replied, forcing a smile. She didn't mention the coin. Not yet. She wasn't sure what it meant, and until she knew more, she didn't want to get anyone's hopes up. Later that night, after the kids had gone to bed, Mara sat at the small kitchen table, the coin resting in front of her. She had tried searching online, but there was nothing that looked exactly like what she had found. There were similar coins, but none with the same markings or the same intricate designs. Whatever it was old, ancient even. She ran her fingers over the coin's surface, feeling the grooves and ridges worn smooth by time. What stories did it hold? What hands had touched it before hers? And what would those hands think of her now, considering selling it to the highest bidder? The thought made her stomach churn. She had always believed that history was something to be preserved, not sold off for profit. But that was before. Now, she had 2 children to feed, and the idea of keeping the coin for its historical value seemed like a luxury she couldn't afford. As she sat there in the quiet of the night, the weight of the decision pressed down on her. Tomorrow, she would have to start looking for answers. And soon, she would have to make a choice. One that would change everything. The next morning, Mara woke up with a renewed sense of purpose. The coin still weighed heavily in her pocket, both literally and metaphorically. As she made breakfast for Luca and Sarah, she couldn't shake the thoughts swirling in her mind. The idea that this single object could change their lives seemed both ridiculous and completely plausible at the same time. Sarah, always the early riser, skipped into the kitchen and climbed onto a chair. "Morning, Mom," she said cheerfully. "Morning, sweetheart," Mara replied, trying to sound as normal as possible. Luca shuffled in not long after, rubbing his eyes. "What's for breakfast?" "Just eggs today," Mara said, sliding a plate over to him. As they ate, her mind wandered back to the coin, trying to figure out her next move. She needed more information, but the internet search she had done last night had yielded very little. She needed to find someone who knew more about artifacts like this, someone who could appraise it properly. After dropping Sarah off at school, Mara took Luca to the small library near their apartment. It was one of the last few places that hadn't been affected by the city's latest round of budget cuts. Inside, the musty smell of old books brought back a flood of memories for Mara. Her days as a student, studying ancient civilizations and dreaming of a career in history. Those dreams had long since faded, replaced by the realities of motherhood and survival. Luca was already deep into the stacks, pulling out books on archaeology. He had inherited Mara's love for history, though he was far more passionate about it than she had been at his age. "Mom, look at this," Luca said, showing her a thick book filled with images of ancient coins. "Do you think it looks like any of these?" Mara glanced at the book, her eyes scanning the various images. Some of them looked close, but none matched the coin in her pocket exactly. Still, seeing similar coins with such high valuations in the book made her heart race. If her coin was anything like these, it could be worth more than she had imagined. "I don't know," she said carefully. "It's hard to tell." They spent the next few hours flipping through books and scanning online archives, but nothing gave them the definitive answer they were looking for. Frustrated, Mara finally suggested they head home. She needed to think, to figure out her next move. The weight of the decision, whether to sell the coin or keep it, felt heavier with each passing hour. Later that afternoon, after Luca and Sarah had gone off to their respective after-school activities, Mara received a call from one of her old college friends, Mira, who still worked in the history department at the local university. They hadn't spoken in years, but Mara remembered that Mira had connections with people who specialized in ancient artifacts. "I have something I need your opinion on," Mara said, keeping her voice low as she described the coin to Mira. Mira's voice brightened with curiosity. "It sounds fascinating. If it's real, you could be sitting on something incredibly valuable." "Valuable," Mara repeated, the words sticking in her throat. "I know a guy who deals in these sorts of things. His name is Mr. Velasquez. He could give you a proper appraisal, but I'll warn you, he's a businessman. He deals in high-end antiquities, and he doesn't come cheap." Mara hung up the phone, a new layer of anxiety settling over her. Mr. Velasquez. The name alone sounded foreboding. She wasn't sure if she was ready to get involved with someone who dealt in high-end antiquities. But at this point, she didn't have much choice. If the coin was as valuable as Mira suggested, it could solve all her financial problems in one fell swoop. The next day, Mara made the decision to visit Mr. Velasquez. Mara stood outside the tall, polished building where Mr. Velasquez's office was located. The neighborhood was a far cry from her own, filled with expensive cars and even more expensive shops. She had never felt more out of place, but the coin in her pocket reminded her why she was here. If this was her ticket to a better life for Luca and Sarah, then she would do whatever it took to cash it in. Inside, the office was as grand as the building itself. High ceilings, gleaming floors, and glass cases filled with ancient artifacts made Mara feel as if she had stepped into a museum. Mr. Velasquez was seated behind a large mahogany desk, his sharp eyes immediately locking onto the coin in her hand as she pulled out. "Well, well," he said with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "What do we have here?" Mara swallowed nervously. "I found it in the fountain. I thought it might be worth something, but I'm not sure." Mr. Velasquez reached out, taking the coin with practiced ease. He turned it over in his hands, studying it with the precision of someone who had done this 1,000 times before. The silence stretched out as Mara watched him, her heart pounding in her chest. "This is an old one," he finally said, placing the coin on his desk. "A very old one. I'd say you're looking at something from at least the 17th century, possibly older. The craftsmanship is exquisite." Mara's heart leapt. "So, it's worth something?" "More than something," Mr. Velasquez said, leaning back in his chair. "It's worth quite a bit, actually. If you're interested, I can make you an offer right now." Mara felt a flicker of excitement, but also a sense of unease. Something about the way Mr. Velasquez spoke made her wary, as if he were hiding something. "How much?" He smiled again, that same practiced smile that never quite reached his eyes. "Let's say $50,000. Cash." The number hit her like a punch to the gut. $50,000. That was more money than she had ever seen in her life. With that kind of money, she could pay off all her debts, move into a better apartment, give Luca and Sarah the life they deserved. But something held her back. "That's a lot of money," she said slowly. "But I'm not sure." "Take your time," Mr. Velasquez said smoothly, though his eyes gleamed with impatience. "I won't pressure you, but offers like this don't come around every day." Mara stood up, the coin still resting on his desk. "I need to think about it." Mr. Velasquez's smile faltered, but only for a moment. "Of course. But remember, this coin is valuable because it's rare. It won't stay that way forever. The sooner you sell, the better." Mara nodded, her mind spinning as she left the office. She felt the weight of the decision pressing down on her once again. $50,000 could change everything. But something about Mr. Velasquez's offer didn't sit right with her. And as much as she wanted to believe that selling the coin was the answer, a small voice inside her whispered that there was more at stake than money. As she walked down the busy streets, the city around her seemed to blur, her mind focused solely on the decision ahead. She knew she couldn't put off for long. The cold wind whipped against Mara's face as she walked home from Mr. Velasquez's office, the weight of his offer bearing down on her shoulders. $50,000 was more than just a number. It was security, stability, and the future she had always hoped for her children. But there was something about Velasquez that she couldn't shake. The way his eyes lingered on the coin, the calculated tone in his voice when he mentioned its worth. That evening, after putting Luca and Sarah to bed, Mara found herself sitting once more at the kitchen table, the coin in front of her. The flickering light of the small lamp cast shadows across its surface, illuminating the intricate details she hadn't noticed before. There was something about this coin, something more than just its monetary value. It felt like a piece of history, a connection to a time long past. Her thoughts turned to the old fountain, where she had found the coin. The fountain had always seemed like a relic of the city's former glory, but now it felt more significant. It was as if the fountain had called out to her, offering her this small treasure as a way to remember the past. But why? Determined to learn more, Mara returned to the library the next day, this time on her own. She was determined to dig deeper into the history of the city and the coin. The library was quiet as she sat down at one of the old wooden desks, pulling out books on the city's history, hoping to find some clue about the origins of the coin. Hours passed as Mara flipped through pages, scanning old records and historical accounts. It wasn't until she came across a small, dusty book tucked away on the top shelf that she finally found something. The book was a historical account of the city from the 17th century, and as she read through it, one passage caught her eye. It described a series of coins minted during a time of political unrest, meant to symbolize the unity of the city's rulers. These coins, the book claimed, had been lost over time, many of them buried or stolen during various uprisings. According to the account, there were rumors that some of the coins were hidden in secret locations around the city, including near the old fountain that had once served as a gathering place for the city's elite. Mara's heart raced as she read the description. The markings on the coins in the book matched the one she had found almost exactly. This wasn't just any coin. It was part of a larger collection, a piece of a city's forgotten history. But why had it been left in the fountain? And how many more were out there? Mara realized that this coin wasn't just valuable because of its age. It was valuable because it was part of something much bigger. If she sold it, she might be giving up a chance to uncover something truly significant, not just for her, but for the city. But the question remained, was she willing to risk everything for history? Mara left the library with her mind racing, clutching the small book tightly in her hands. She couldn't stop thinking about the implications of what she had learned. This coin wasn't just a rare artifact. It was a key to a larger mystery, a story that had been lost to time. And she had found it. But as much as the historian in her wanted to dive deeper, the practical side of her knew that uncovering the city's hidden history wouldn't put food on the table. And that was the struggle she faced, whether to hold on to the coin for the sake of history, or to sell it and secure a better life for Luca and Sarah. That evening, Mara sat down with Luca at the kitchen table, the coin and the old book spread out between them. She explained what she had discovered at the library, watching as Luca's eyes lit up with excitement. "So, this coin is part of a hidden treasure?" Luca asked, his voice filled with awe. "Something like that," Mara replied. "But it's more than just treasure. It's a part of our city's history, a piece of a story that's been lost for hundreds of years." Luca's face grew serious. "We can't sell it, Mom. This is too important." Mara sighed, rubbing her temples. "I know, Luca, but $50,000 is a lot of money. It could change everything for us." Luca shook his head. "It's not about the money. This coin belongs to the city. It's our history, and we can't just sell it to someone like Mr. Velasquez." Mara felt a pang of guilt as she listened to her son. He was right, of course, but the weight of their financial situation made it hard for her to see beyond the immediate future. How could she focus on history when they were barely making it through each day? But then there was Sarah, who was too young to understand the magnitude of their situation. To her, the world was still full of possibilities and dreams, unburdened by the harsh realities Mara faced every day. The next morning, as Mara prepared breakfast, the doorbell rang. Opening the door, she found Mr. Velasquez standing on the other side, his sharp eyes scanning her apartment. "I hope I'm not interrupting," he said smoothly. "I just wanted to follow up on our conversation." Mara felt her stomach twist. She hadn't expected him to come in person, and his presence only heightened her anxiety. I haven't made a decision yet." Mr. Velasquez smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. "That's understandable. It's a big decision, but I wanted to make sure you knew that my offer still stands. In fact, I'd be willing to raise it to $60,000 if that helps make the choice easier." Mara's heart skipped a beat. $60,000. It was more money than she had ever dreamed of, and the thought of turning it down seemed insane. But something about Velasquez's eagerness made her pause. Why was he so desperate to get his hands on the coin? "I appreciate the offer, but I need more time," Mara said, trying to keep her voice steady. Velasquez's expression didn't change, but there was a flicker of impatience in his eyes. "Of course. But remember, time is of essence. This coin won't stay valuable forever." The sooner you make a decision, the better for both of us." Mara nodded, feeling the weight of his words pressing down on her. Velasquez left, and as the door closed behind him, Mara slumped against a wall, her mind swirling with doubt. The pressure was building, and Mara knew she couldn't put off the decision much longer. But with each passing day, the stakes seemed to grow higher. Luca was adamant that they couldn't sell the coin, and Mara's own doubts about Velasquez's motives only fueled her uncertainty. As the city continued its plans to demolish the old fountain, Mara realized that the coin might be the last link to a history that was about to be erased forever. And if she didn't act soon, that history and the story it told might be lost for good. The next few days passed in a blur for Mara. Mr. Velasquez's visit had left a sour taste in her mouth, and Luca's constant insistence that the coin was more than just a piece of metal only added to her growing anxiety. The tension between them simmered beneath the surface, unspoken but palpable in every conversation. Luca's passion for history reminded Mara of her younger self, idealistic, full of hope, and unwilling to compromise. But life had taught her hard lessons, and now survival seemed to be the only thing that mattered. One evening, after dinner, Mara noticed Luca sneaking out of the apartment. It wasn't unusual for him to go out after school, but something about the way he moved caught her attention. He had been quieter than usual lately, and that worried her. Curiosity got the better of her, and she decided to follow him, careful to keep her distance. Luca led her through the winding streets of their neighborhood, past the closed shops and empty parks. Eventually, he reached the Historical Society building, a modest structure nestled between taller, more modern buildings. Mara's heart sank as she watched him disappear inside. What was he doing here? And more importantly, why hadn't he told her? Mara waited outside for what felt like hours, her mind racing with possibilities. Finally, Luca emerged, and Mara ducked behind a tree to avoid being seen. He looked different, determined even. His footsteps were quick and confident as he hurried back toward home, and Mara followed at a distance, feeling a sense of dread building in her chest. When they arrived home, Luca didn't say a word. He went straight to his room, leaving Mara alone in the living room, grappling with the uneasy feeling that something had shifted between them. The next morning, Mara's suspicions were confirmed when she received a call from the Historical Society. Her stomach dropped as the voice on the other end of the line explained that Luca had come to them with a story about a rare coin he believed was linked to the city's forgotten history. He had brought the book she had borrowed from the library and shared everything he had learned. "He's very passionate," the voice said kindly. "We'd love to learn more about the coin if you're willing to bring it in. This could be an important discovery." Mara hung up, her hands shaking. Luca had gone behind her back. He had betrayed her trust, and now the Historical Society knew about the coin. Her mind raced as she considered the implications. If word got out about the coin, there would be no turning back. Mr. Velasquez would likely hear about it too, and Mara feared what he might do if he thought she was trying to back out of their deal. When Luca returned home that afternoon, Mara was waiting for him. She stood in the middle of the living room, arms crossed, the coin resting on the coffee table between them. "Luca," she began, her voice trembling with a mixture of anger and hurt. "I got a call from the Historical Society today." Luca froze, his eyes widening in surprise. "Mom, How could you do this without telling me?" Mara interrupted, her voice rising. "You went behind my back. You had no right to involve them." "I had to," Luca said, his voice filled with frustration. "You're not thinking straight. This coin is important, Mom. It belongs to the city, not to us. We can't just sell it to some rich guy who's going to hide it away." Mara's anger flared. "You don't understand, Luca. We need that money. This isn't about history. It's about survival. I have to think about your future, about Sarah's future." Luca shook his head, his face red with emotion. "This is our history. If we sell it, it'll be gone forever. Is that really what you want?" Mara's heart ached as she looked at her son, standing there with all his youthful conviction. She wanted to protect him from the harsh realities of the world, but she couldn't deny the truth. They were barely making it, and the coin was their way out. "I don't know what to do," Mara admitted, her voice softening. I just don't know. Luca looked at her, his expression softening as well. Please, Mom, just think about it. This is bigger than us. Mara didn't respond. She couldn't. Her mind was too clouded by doubt and fear. Luca had forced her hand, and now she had no choice but to confront the consequences of his actions. The tension between Mara and Luca lingered like a dark cloud over their small apartment in the days that followed. The coin, once a source of curiosity and possibility, had become a symbol of their conflict. Mara tried to focus on her work, on caring for Sarah, but the weight of the decision loomed over her like an inescapable burden. One afternoon, as Mara sat at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the coin, there was a knock at the door. Her heart leapt into her throat, her immediate thought being that Mr. Velasquez had found out about Luca's trip to the Historical Society. But when she opened the door, it wasn't Velasquez standing there. It was an elderly man dressed in a simple suit, his face kind and lined with age. Good afternoon, he said, his voice soft but steady. My name is Dr. Fenton. I'm from the Historical Society. May I come in? Mara hesitated, unsure of what to say, but something about the man's demeanor reassured her. She stepped aside, allowing him into the small apartment. Dr. Fenton moved slowly, his eyes scanning the room with a quiet appreciation for the humble surroundings. I'm here about the coin, he said gently, taking a seat at the kitchen table. Your son told us a great deal about it, and I must say, it's quite remarkable. If it's truly what we believe it to be, this coin could unlock an extraordinary piece of our city's history. Mara's hands trembled as she placed the coin in front of him. Dr. Fenton examined it with care, his eyes lighting up with a mixture of excitement and reverence. This coin, he said slowly, isn't just valuable because of its age. It's part of a much larger story, one that has been buried for centuries. You see, these coins were minted during a time of great upheaval in our city. They were symbols of unity, meant to bring together the fractured factions of the time. But most of them were lost, stolen, or hidden away during the conflicts that followed. Mara listened, her heart pounding as Dr. Fenton continued. If this coin is what we think it is, he said, it could lead us to other treasures, documents, artifacts, perhaps even a hidden cache of items that could rewrite the history of our city. This isn't just a coin, Mrs. Harris. This is a key. Mara's mind spun with the weight of his words. This coin wasn't just a valuable artifact. It was part of something much bigger, something that could change the way people saw their city, their past. She had been right to hesitate, to question whether selling it was the right thing to do. But with Dr. Fenton's revelation came a new complication. If the coin was truly this important, then selling it to Mr. Velasquez would be even more disastrous than she had imagined. The coin didn't just belong to her. It belonged to the city, to history. And if she sold it, that history would be lost forever. Mara felt a wave of guilt wash over her. She had been so focused on her family's immediate needs that she hadn't considered the bigger picture. Luca had been right all along. But now, with Dr. Fenton's revelation, the stakes had never been higher. The coin was more than just a way out of poverty. It was a key to unlocking a forgotten past. And Mara had to decide if she was willing to sacrifice that for her own gain. Mara sat at the kitchen table long after Dr. Fenton had left, his words echoing in her mind. This coin could rewrite history. It wasn't just valuable to collectors. It was a key to the city's forgotten past. The weight of the decision seemed heavier than ever, and Mara couldn't shake the feeling that every choice she made from this point on would ripple far beyond her own life. Luca had been right, and the guilt gnawed at her. She had been so focused on the possibility of escaping their financial struggles that she hadn't seen what was right in front of her, a chance to make a real difference, not just for her family, but for the city they called home. That evening, she sat with Luca and Sarah at the dinner table. Sarah chattered away, oblivious to the tension that had been building between Mara and Luca over the past few days. Luca, on the other hand, was quiet, watching his mother with guarded eyes. Finally, after Sarah had gone to bed, Mara turned to Luca. I spoke with Dr. Fenton today. Luca looked up, surprised. You did? Mara nodded. He told me about the coin, about what it could mean for the city. Luca's expression softened, and for the first time in days, Mara felt a flicker of hope. Mom, this coin is important. I know it could help us if we sold it, but we can't let it fall into the wrong hands. This is bigger than us. Mara sighed, her heart heavy. I know, Luca. I realize that now, but it's not just about the money. It's about what that money could do for us. For you and Sarah. I've spent so many years trying to keep us afloat, and now I have a chance to change everything. It's hard to let go of that. Luca reached across the table, his voice gentle but firm. You've already done so much for us, Mom. But this coin, it could change the way people see our city, our history. It could be something that lasts forever. Mara sat back, the enormity of the choice pressing down on her. She knew Luca was right. The coin had a significance that went beyond her family's immediate needs, and if she sold it to Mr. Velasquez, she would be giving up something irreplaceable. But wasn't just the coin, it was their future at stake too. The next day, Mara made a decision. She called Mr. Velasquez, her hands shaking as she held the phone. His smooth voice answered on the other end. Mara, he said, his tone warm but calculated. Have you made your decision? Yes, Mara replied, her voice steady. I'm not selling the coin. There was a brief pause, and when Mr. Velasquez spoke again, his voice was colder. Are you sure? $60,000 is a lot of money, and I could raise my offer if it would help change your mind. Mara took a deep breath. I'm sure. The coin belongs to the city. I can't sell it to you. Mr. Velasquez's voice tightened. You're making a mistake, Mara. You won't get another offer like this. Think about your family. I have thought about my family, Mara said, her resolve firm. This coin is part of something bigger, and I won't be the one to take that away. There was silence on the other end of the line for a long moment before Mr. Velasquez finally spoke. Very well, he said, his voice laced with a thin layer of menace. But don't expect this to end well for you. Mara hung up the phone, her heart racing. She had made her decision, but she knew that Velasquez wouldn't let go easily. Still, she couldn't allow herself to be swayed by threats. The coin wasn't hers to sell. It was a part of the city's legacy, and she would do everything in her power to protect it. The days that followed were tense, but Mara felt a sense of clarity she hadn't experienced in years. She had made the right choice, and now it was up to her to ensure that the coin ended up where it belonged. The day of the city council meeting arrived faster than Mara had anticipated. She had been invited by Dr. Fenton and the Historical Society to present her findings to the city's leaders, hoping to gain support for preserving the old fountain and the hidden history it held. The city council chambers were crowded with concerned citizens, historians, and local officials, all gathered to discuss the fate of the fountain. The air was thick with anticipation as Mara walked to the front of the room, the coin safely tucked in her pocket. Dr. Fenton stood by her side, offering a reassuring nod as she took her place at the podium. Mara's hands trembled as she gripped the edges, her nerves threatening to overwhelm her. But then she glanced out at the crowd and saw Luca sitting in the front row, his eyes filled with pride. That gave her the strength she needed. She began by explaining how she had found the coin, carefully detailing its significance and what it represented for the city's history. The room was silent as she spoke, the weight of her words sinking in. When she finished, she pulled the coin from her pocket and held up for everyone to see. This coin is more than just a piece of metal, she said, her voice steady. It's a key to our past, a part of a story that's been forgotten for too long. If we lose this, we lose a piece of who we are. The room buzzed with whispers as the council members exchanged glances. Dr. Fenton stepped forward, backing up Mara's claims with historical evidence and urging the city to preserve the fountain and the hidden treasure it held. After what felt like an eternity, the council president spoke. We appreciate your efforts, Mrs. Harris. This coin is indeed remarkable, and we will take your proposal into serious consideration. Mara exhaled slowly, the tension draining from her body. She had done it. She had stood up for what was right, and now the future of the coin and the city's history was in the hands of the council. A week later, Mara received the news she had been waiting for. The city council had voted to preserve the fountain and establish a historical exhibit that would showcase the coin and other artifacts uncovered during the excavation. The city's history would be saved, and Mara's name would be forever linked to the discovery. As she walked through the city with Luca and Sarah by her side, Mara felt a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. They still had their struggles, but they had something more now, a legacy. And that was worth more than any amount of money. The fountain, once forgotten and neglected, was now a symbol of hope and resilience. Mara watched as Luca ran ahead, his eyes bright with excitement. He had his future ahead of him, and Mara knew that she had made the right choice. As they approached the fountain, Mara paused, her gaze lingering on the water shimmering in the sunlight. She smiled, her heart full of pride and gratitude. The coin had changed everything, but not in the way she had expected. It wasn't the money that had saved them. It was history, both theirs and the city's, that had given them a new beginning. And with that, Mara knew that they were going to be okay. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It really helps us grow and bring more stories like this to you. I'd love to hear your thoughts. What part of this story had the biggest impact on you? Was it Mara's tough decision, Luca's passion for history, or the discovery of the coin's true significance? Let me know in the comments below. Also, I'm always looking for new story ideas. If you have any suggestions for stories you'd like to see on the channel, whether it's about history, mystery, or something completely different, drop your ideas in the comments. Your feedback helps shape the content, and I can't wait to see what you come up with. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.